And joining us now to debate the pros and cons of CETA, the Canada-Europe trade agreement, Frank Atkins, professor of economics at the University of Calgary. And in Toronto tonight, Erin Weir, economist at the Canadian National Office of the United Steelworkers Union. Gentlemen, good evening. Good to see you on Alberta Prime Time.
Good evening.
Thanks for having us.
Good evening.
Frank, I want to start with you. Who stands to benefit the most from this deal?
Well, I think the whole country will benefit, and Alberta will benefit very definitely. As to how much, we don't know until it actually happens. What happens with these free trade deals is you get the political negotiations, then you sign on the dotted line, then the private sector has to take over. And, you know, Alberta has a good reputation of having the private sector take over and do very well. So I think what we're going to get out of this is we're going to get a lot of job creation, we'll get a lot of boost in GDP, and it'll be a win-win situation all around.
Erin, this deal, though, worries you. What are your chief concerns?
Well, I have really two main concerns. The first is that trade between Canada and Europe is very imbalanced. So far this year, Canada imported about $36 billion worth of goods from Europe, but we were only able to export $22 billion. The federal government is talking about a 20% boost in trade flows across the board. That would mean about $7 billion of additional imports from Europe versus only about $4 billion of additional exports. I fear that $7 billion of imports would displace a lot more Canadian production and jobs than $4 billion of exports could create. But beyond the issue of trade, this is a comprehensive economic agreement, and it goes into things like labor mobility, which could allow European companies to import a lot more temporary foreign workers rather than hiring Canadians. There's an investor-state dispute resolution process, which would give European companies a special procedure to directly challenge our democratic laws and regulations. There's also this extension of pharmaceutical patents, which would really drive up drug costs both for provincial governments and for individual Canadians who need that kind of medication.
Okay, I'm going to pick up on one of your points and go to Gil McGowan. He's president of the Alberta Federation of Labour. He worries Canadian workers may be displaced, not because of competition, but because of a section in the New Deal that allows European companies to bring in their own workers. Let's hear from him.
Big construction companies like Italian-based Eni and like other big European multinational firms, they're increasing their presence in the oil sands. So we're looking at the potential to lose not just dozens of jobs, not just hundreds of jobs, but literally thousands of jobs to European firms that bring their workers with them as opposed to hiring Canadians here.
Frank, how much worry should this cause Albertans?
Well, I don't see how this is a worry at all. You hear the words job shortage, labor shortages all over the place now. We're crying for workers. We're crying for skilled workers out here. With the amount of growth that we're projected to have through oil and gas growth, we need to bring workers in. I don't see why we should fear bringing workers in. We need them for the kind of growth that we're going to experience. So I don't understand how this is really a problem.
I want to talk a bit about the agriculture industry as well. Erin, both Premier Redford and the Prime Minister on record as saying that the European deal will benefit beef and pork producers in our province. From your perspective, is that the case?
Well, it's really hard to say. I mean, I know that Canadian beef producers have been shut out of a lot of export markets in recent years, so I understand that their associations may be keen to grab hold of this deal as a possible window of opportunity. The reality, though, is that Europe still has very strict restrictions on the presence of hormones and antibiotics in meat, and those restrictions are going to keep Canadian beef out of the European market to a very large extent, even with this deal. So I don't think it's all it's been cracked up to be for livestock producers. I also do want to go back to this point about temporary foreign workers because, you know, Frank and the federal government are trying to sell this deal on the grounds that it'll create jobs for Canadians. Well, that won't happen if European companies are able to just import their workforces. And as Gil McGowan said in that clip, we have a very concrete example of that already happening in Alberta, where this Italian contractor working on Husky's Sunrise project is using foreign workers as opposed to Canadians.
The Americans are our biggest trading partner. How will this European deal impact the flow of trade to the U.S.? Erin, quickly.
Well, I mean, it's possible that it will divert some of that trade to Europe, and there is a case to be made for Canada to have more diversified trade. But I think the big picture is that our trade flows with the United States will still dwarf our trade flows with Europe. And certainly that is by far the more important economic relationship for Canada. I mean, you can talk about Europe being larger than the United States in terms of its population and economy, but in terms of business opportunities for Canada, this deal is actually quite small compared to the United States.
And it's far from being signed and sealed. So what, from this juncture forward, what should Albertans expect out of CETA? Erin, very quickly.
Well, I think you make a good point that the deal actually isn't done yet, and I think one of the risks of announcing it before it's finalized is now Canada's in a very weak bargaining position in terms of sorting out whatever is left on the negotiating table. So I think that Albertans and all Canadians should be concerned about that.
Frank?
No, I don't think we need to be concerned at all. I think this is a normal sort of a timing with one of these announcements. Sort of the original North American free trade agreement, back to the Mulroney years, it got announced before all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted. I think it's something that we've got to look forward to. It's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. We all agree with that, but it's something we can look forward to.
Gentlemen, great pleasure speaking with you both. Appreciate your perspectives. That's Frank Atkins, Professor of Economics with the University of Calgary, and Erin Weir, an economist with the United Steelworkers Union. Thank you both.